So I went down a rabbit hole trying to find the best single-player games ever, and I'm not gonna lie, this list got kinda crazy. Some of these are obvious, but a few completely surprised me, and yet every single one of these is actually worth your time.
Mafia Definitive Edition is the kind of game you just fall into. You start off as Tommy, a normal guy just living his life, and then everything starts happening around him. You drive old cars that feel heavy and awkward at first, and honestly, that's part of the charm. You feel the difference between each vehicle, and it makes driving a part of the game instead of just moving from point A to B. The streets are busy but manageable, and the city has a rhythm that pulls you in. You notice the lights, the rain, the way the city feels alive even when you're just cruising. Missions are all connected, so you're never doing random stuff that drags things out. One mission flows into the next, and the game always gives you a reason to keep going. Some missions are slow and tense, where you're sneaking or just driving while characters talk, and others hit hard with gunfights, where one mistake can end you. It keeps things varied without ever feeling messy. Every chapter has a small twist or moment that makes you care about what happens next, without the game forcing it. The story and characters are really grounded. People talk while doing stuff, and it feels natural. Characters joke, argue, or just sit in silence sometimes, and it works. You start noticing how each person reacts in small ways, and it makes the story stick. You actually care about what's going on without feeling like the game is trying to manipulate you. Combat is tight, guns hit hard, cover matters, and enemies don't just stand there waiting for you. It's satisfying but not over the top. You learn to move carefully, plan your approach, and take your time instead of just spamming buttons. Driving can also become part of combat, since chase missions feel different every time, depending on the car you're in and how you approach it. Even though it's technically open, the game doesn't let you get lost. The city is there if you want to explore a bit, but the missions guide you naturally. You're always moving forward, and there's a nice balance between quiet moments and tense action. By the end, it all comes together smoothly, leaving you feeling like you went on a full journey, rather than just checking boxes. Overall, Mafia Definitive Edition is all about pacing, flow, and story. It's linear, but it never feels limited. The gameplay, city, driving, combat, and conversations all work together to keep you hooked till the credits roll. You just want to see what happens next, and it does a great job of keeping that momentum going the entire time. We are cheating a little bit here because this is technically 3 games, but you absolutely have to play them back to back as one massive saga. The Mass Effect Legendary Edition is the best way to experience this sci-fi masterpiece where you play as Commander Shepard, a human soldier who was the only thing standing between the galaxy and a race of ancient machines called the Reapers who want to wipe out all life. You get to build your own version of Shepard by picking their face and their background, but the real hook is that you carry your save file from the first game all the way through to the third one. This means decisions you make in the first 5 hours of the first game can come back to help you or haunt you hundreds of hours later in the finale. The gameplay is a mix of a third-person cover shooter and a tactical role-playing game. You run in a battle with 2 squad mates by your side, and you can pause the action at any second to issue orders. You might tell your sniper friend Garrus to take out a target on a ridge while you use your biotic powers to lift an enemy into the air and float them helplessly so your other teammate can blast them with a shotgun. The combat gets faster and tighter with every game in the series, evolving from a more slow-paced RPG style in the beginning to a super intense action shooter by the end, where you are sliding over cover and dodging rockets. The world building is honestly some of the best ever created because you get to explore the Milky Way galaxy on your own starship called the Normandy. You fly from planet to planet, scanning for resources and landing on alien worlds to solve problems or fight mercenaries. Between missions, you walk around your ship and talk to your crew, which is made up of some of the coolest aliens in gaming history, like the reptilian Krogans or the blue-skinned Asari. It is a linear story that makes you feel like the captain of your own destiny, and by the time the credits roll on the third game, you will feel like you actually lived through a space war with your best friends. Guardians of the Galaxy, we have to talk about. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy came out of nowhere and totally blew everyone away by being one of the best single-player story games in years. You play exactly one character, Star-Lord, and that was a genius move by the developers because it makes you feel like the actual leader of a chaotic group of misfits who barely listen to you. The whole game is a linear road trip across the galaxy, where you go from one colorful alien planet to another, and there are absolutely no microtransactions or multiplayer modes to distract you from the adventure. It focuses entirely on telling a funny and surprisingly emotional story about a dysfunctional family trying to stick together while saving the universe from a purple cult. The combat is chaotic in the best way possible because you are the conductor of the orchestra. You run around blasting enemies with your element guns and using your jet boots to dodge attacks, but your real power comes from commanding your teammates. You hold a button to slow down time and tell Gamora to slice a robot's arms off, or order Groot to trap a group of enemies in his roots so Rocket can blow them all up with a grenade. It feels messy and loud, but once you get into the rhythm of calling out orders while sliding across the floor shooting your blasters, it creates this perfect flow that makes you feel like a tactical genius. The absolute best mechanic in the game is the huddle. When a fight gets too intense, you can call a timeout, and the whole team gathers around you to complain or cheer depending on how the battle is going. You have to listen to what they say and pick the right speech to motivate them. And if you get it right, Star-Lord hits play on his cassette player, and a massive 80s hit like Kickstart My Heart starts blasting. The whole team gets a huge power boost, and you go back into the fight with rock and roll playing in the background. The banter never stops, even when you're just walking around, and the choices you make in conversations change how the team treats you, making every moment feel personal and alive. Detroit Become Human, this game is actually a banger. It is arguably the best interactive drama ever made, and for once, the Choices Matter tag isn't just a marketing lie to get you to buy the game. The story is, the premise is pretty standard sci-fi stuff. You are in the near future, androids are everywhere, and they are basically treated like modern-day slaves. They clean toilets, take care of kids, and do all the shit humans don't want to do. Naturally, they start waking up and realizing that being a slave is terrible. You play as 3 different androids, and their stories are completely distinct but weave together in a way that actually makes sense. First, you have Connor. He is an android cop sent to hunt down other androids that have gone rogue. This is easily the best part of the game. It is a buddy cop movie where you are partnered with this washed-up, alcoholic human detective named Hank. The dynamic here is God tier. You can choose to be a cold, calculating machine that only cares about the mission, or you can try to be empathetic and actually make friends with the guy. Then there's Marcus. He is the one leading the revolution. His sections are grand and high stakes. You are basically deciding if the android uprising is going to be a peaceful protest or a violent bloodbath. The game lets you go full pacifist or full anarchist, and the public opinion in the game world actually shifts based on what you do. Finally, you have Kara. Her story is much more personal and smaller in scale. She is just trying to protect a little girl and escape to safety. It is the emotional core of the game, and if you have a heart, some of these scenes will actually stress you out because the threat of permadeath is real. Now for the mechanics and gameplay. This is a movie game, so do not go in expecting to be 360 no-scoping people. The gameplay is mostly walking around, talking to people, and hitting buttons during QuickTime events. But the implementation is actually solid. The investigation scenes with Connor are a highlight. You walk into a crime scene, analyze blood samples, reconstruct bullet trajectories, and piece together what happened. It feels rewarding because if you screw up the investigation, you might miss a crucial clue that unlocks a dialogue option later. The biggest mechanical flex in this game is the flowchart. At the end of every chapter, the game literally shows you a massive tree of all the possible outcomes. You can see exactly where the story branched and realize you missed like 3 entire scenes because you decided to look at a magazine instead of talking to a suspect. It is insane how much content is hidden behind specific choices. You could play this game 3 times and get completely different endings for every character. The graphics are honestly some of the most impressive stuff you will see on a console or PC. Quantic Dream spent an obscene amount of money on motion capture, and it shows. The faces don't look like melted plastic. You can actually read the emotions on the characters without them saying a word. The environment design in Detroit is also top tier. It nails that near-future aesthetic where everything looks sleek but also kind of miserable and cold. It is a very good-looking game, plain and simple. If you want a game that respects your time and your intelligence, play this. It's not perfect, and there are definitely some moments where the allegory for civil rights is about as subtle as a brick to the face. But the characters are memorable, the tension is real, and the fact that you can permanently kill off your main characters by making a bad call adds a layer of stress that most games are too cowardly to attempt. It's a solid experience from start to finish.
Follow me. I'll take you to your room.
Okay, now what?
Dispatch is the perfect example of what happens when you focus on the writing instead of trying to render every individual pore on a character's face. You play as Robert Robertson, a washed-up superhero working a desk job is already a massive win. The premise is genius because it flips the entire superhero genre on its head. Instead of being the guy flying around punching aliens, you are the guy in the chair. You are the one dealing with the logistics, the budget cuts, and the absolute incompetence of the heroes you are supposed to be managing. It is stressful in a way that feels very real. You aren't losing because you missed a QuickTime event, you are losing because you sent the wrong C-list hero to stop a bank robbery and now civilians are dead and your boss is screaming at you. The writing is sharp, cynical, and legitimately funny. It feels like The Boys, but with more focus on the mundane nightmare of corporate bureaucracy. And the tension comes from the fact that you are helpless. You can't jump in and save the day, you have to trust that the idiot you sent can handle the job. The core loop is managing a live map of the city. Crimes and incidents pop up in real time, bank robberies, cats stuck in a tree, alien invasions. And you have a roster of heroes to send out. But here's the catch. You don't just click send hero, you have to actually analyze the situation. Each hero has stats, strength, vigor, charisma, intellect, combat power, and mental stability. If you send a tank character like Golem to a hostage negotiation, he's going to punch a hole in the building and get the hostages killed. You have to match the right hero to the right job, but the game constantly throws curveballs. Your best hero might be unavailable because they're doing a podcast interview or recovering from a hangover. You are constantly forced to make do with the B team, which creates this insane tension. Then there are also some little simple but fun and satisfying hacking puzzles in the game that add a bit more variety to the gameplay. They aren't overly complex or anything, but hacking something might give your hero some more power or an advantage in specific situations, and sometimes they're just a part of the story. Visually, it keeps things simple with a stylized comic book aesthetic that looks clean and runs smoothly. It proves that you don't need a massive budget to make a game that people will actually remember. It's just a damn good time that reminds you why we play games in the first place, to experience a good story, not to grind for digital currency.
What is it?
I'm not quite drunk enough to share my origin story just yet, but remind me to tell you someday.
Definitely.
Plague Tale: Innocence. This game is basically a simulator for having the absolute worst week of your life. If you looked at The Last of Us and thought it was too cheerful and needed about 5,000% more rats, then this is the game for you. It is a stealth game set in medieval France during the Black Death, which is already a setting that screams depression, but then they added supernatural rat swarms just to really drive the point home that God has abandoned this world. It is stressful, it is gross, and it is weirdly heartwarming in a twisted way. You play as Amicia, a teenage girl who has to take care of her little brother, Hugo. Hugo has some weird magic blood disease called the macula, and because of this, the Inquisition wants to capture him. The Inquisition in this game makes the Empire from Star Wars look like a charity organization. They are comically evil and will murder anything that moves. The entire story is just you dragging this little kid through mud, corpses, and battlefields while trying not to get eaten alive. The relationship between the siblings is the whole point. At the start, they barely know each other because Hugo has been locked in a room his whole life. But by the end, you will genuinely care about this little dude. It is essentially an escort mission that lasts the entire game, which usually sounds like a nightmare, but Hugo is actually written well enough that you don't want to throw him into a pit of rats most of the time. Now for the gameplay. It is pure stealth and puzzle solving. You are a teenage girl with a sling. You are not Kratos. You cannot fight a guy in full plate armor with your bare hands. If a guard gets within grabbing distance, you are dead. The combat is all about keeping your distance and using your brain. You use your sling to break lanterns to unleash the rats on guards, or you hit them in the head with a rock to knock them out. It is extremely satisfying to hear that dink sound when a rock connects with a helmet. The rats are the main mechanic. They are terrified of light, so the game becomes this deadly puzzle where you have to manipulate light sources to create a path through a sea of biting death. If you step into the shadows for 1 second, you are stripped to the bone instantly. It creates this constant tension where you are safe in the light, but the light is always fading or moving. It is simpler than something like Metal Gear, but the stakes feel higher because you are so powerless. Talking about the graphics, the technology they built for the rats is actually insane. There could be up to 5,000 rats on screen at once, and they move like a fluid. They pour out of vents and walls like a tidal wave of fur and teeth. It is technically impressive and absolutely revolting at the same time. The environments are grim but beautiful in a macabre way. You walk through battlefields piled high with bodies, quaint French villages that are being destroyed by the plague, and dark, damp crypts. The lighting engine does a lot of heavy lifting here since light is a mechanic, and the contrast between the warm safety of a torch and the writhing darkness of the rats looks fantastic. This is a focused, linear story that knows exactly what it wants to be. It is about 10 to 12 hours long, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It is not a happy game. You will see things that will make you lose your appetite, but the narrative payoff is worth the misery. Ghost of Tsushima is basically the Assassin's Creed game that everyone begged Ubisoft to make for a decade, but Sucker Punch actually went ahead and did it properly without loading it full of microtransactions and RPG bloat that nobody asked for. You play as Jin Sakai, one of the last samurai left on the island after the Mongols roll in and absolutely obliterate the local defense force, and the whole narrative centers around this internal conflict of sticking to your honorable samurai code or becoming a backstabbing ninja ghost to save your people. It is a classic Kurosawa film brought to life, and the story doesn't try to be overly complex with twists and turns. It just focuses on the tragedy of a man having to abandon his principles because he realizes that honor doesn't mean anything when your enemy is burning your home to the ground. The relationship between Jin and his uncle, Lord Shimura, is the emotional anchor here, constantly making you feel guilty for using stealth and poison even though you know damn well it is the only way you're going to win a war against an entire army. The combat is arguably the most satisfying swordplay ever put into an open world game because it strikes this perfect balance between accessibility and depth without turning into a button mashing fest. You have these 4 different stances that you switch between on the fly depending on whether you are fighting a guy with a shield, a spear, or a big brute. And once you get the rhythm down, it feels like a choreographed dance of death. It is incredibly lethal, meaning you can cut through enemies in a couple of strikes, but they can do the same to you, which keeps the tension high and makes every encounter feel dangerous rather than just a grind to whittle down health bars. The duel mechanics are a highlight, stripping away all the chaos of the battlefield to lock you into a one-on-one showdown that is all about timing and patience, zooming the camera in tight and letting the tension build before the steel clashes, and it makes you feel like an absolute badass every time you pull off a perfect parry. Visually, this game is a legitimate painting in motion, and the art direction does more heavy lifting than the actual graphical fidelity because they prioritize style over pure realism. The world is constantly moving, with wind blowing through fields of pampas grass, leaves falling from trees in ridiculous quantities, and storms brewing on the horizon, creating an atmosphere that is so thick you can practically breathe it. They made the genius decision to remove the mini-map entirely and use the wind to guide you to your objectives, which sounds like a gimmick, but actually keeps your eyes on the world instead of staring at a UI element in the corner of the screen. It encourages you to actually explore the island organically, following golden birds to hot springs or chasing foxes to shrines. And while some of the side activities can get a bit repetitive after the 30th time, the loop is so zen and the world is so pretty that you don't really mind doing it. The stealth is serviceable, essentially functioning as a lighter version of what you would find in other stealth action games, letting you grapple onto roofs and drop down on unsuspecting Mongols or terrify them with ghost weapons until they run away in fear. It fits the narrative theme of becoming a monster to fight monsters, and seeing the enemies react with genuine terror when you start slaughtering their friends adds a nice layer of immersion to the combat encounters. It is not reinventing the wheel when it comes to open world design, and you will recognize the structure of clearing out camps and liberating regions instantly, but the execution is so polished and the setting is so well realized that it elevates the standard formula into something that feels special. God of War Ragnarok is essentially Santa Monica Studio taking the foundation of the 2018 reboot and injecting it with steroids until it bursts at the seams with content. You are picking up right where the last one left off, but now Fimbulwinter is set in, meaning everything is covered in snow and ice, and the vibe is immediately more desperate and cold. Kratos is still the grumpy dad trying to keep his head down, but our boy, I mean Kratos' boy, is now a moody teenager who thinks he knows everything, which creates this friction that feels incredibly real to anyone who has ever dealt with a kid going through puberty while the apocalypse is happening outside. The narrative centers around the idea of fate and whether you are a prisoner to the prophecy written on the wall or if you can actually change your destiny by making different choices. It is a massive game that spans across all 9 realms, and each one feels distinct and dense, filled with lore that fleshes out the Norse pantheon in a way that makes the gods feel less like mythological figures and more like a dysfunctional crime family. The combat has been refined to the point where it feels almost rhythmic, taking the heavy, grounded impact of the Leviathan axe and mixing it with the chaotic speed of the Blades of Chaos right from the start. You have way more options for movement this time around, including a grapple mechanic that lets you zip up ledges and slam down on enemies, which adds a layer of verticality that the previous game was sorely missing. It is violent and crunchy, with every hit giving you this tactile feedback that makes you feel the weight of the weapon crashing into bone and armor. The enemy variety is significantly better this time, addressing the biggest complaint from the last game where you fought the same troll with a different color palette 5 times. You are fighting everything from small, annoying grim creatures to massive beasts that take up the entire screen, and the game forces you to actually use your entire toolkit rather than just mashing the light attack button until everything dies. The writing for the villains is where this game really separates itself from the pack, specifically with the portrayals of Odin and Thor. Odin isn't portrayed as this Zeus-like figure sitting on a throne throwing lightning bolts. He is written like a manipulative mob boss who talks his way into your head and makes you question everything you thought you knew. Thor is a depressed alcoholic mess who is terrifying not just because he is strong, but because he is unstable and broken, which makes him a far more interesting antagonist than a generic doomsday villain. The game commits to the one continuous shot camera technique again, meaning there are no camera cuts from the moment you press start to the moment the credits roll, which is a technical achievement that keeps you locked into the perspective of the characters without any breaks for loading screens. It can be exhausting because the game is long and refuses to let you look away, but it creates a level of immersion that is hard to replicate. The pacing does stumble a bit in the middle sections where the game decides to slow down and force you into these lengthy walking and talking segments that feel like they go on for about an hour too long. However, these slower moments are usually used to build character relationships that pay off heavily in the finale, so it's a necessary evil to get to the good stuff. It's a story about letting go and trusting the people around you, wrapped in a package of extreme violence and high-budget spectacle. The visual fidelity is top tier, pushing the hardware to display particle effects and lighting that make the realms look like high fantasy concept art come to life. It's a sequel that understands exactly what made the first one good and doubles down on it. Final Fantasy VII Remake is basically Square Enix looking at the first 5 hours of a 20-year-old game and deciding to stretch it into a full 40-hour RPG, which sounds like a blatant cash grab on paper, but somehow manages to be one of the most satisfying action games ever made, despite some baffling design choices. You are stepping back into the boots of Cloud Strife, who is an emotionally stunted eco-terrorist mercenary with a sword the size of a surfboard, and the game does an incredible job of making Midgar feel like a real, suffocating industrial dystopia rather than just a series of pre-rendered backgrounds. The production value is through the roof, with cutscenes that transition seamlessly into gameplay and character models that look better than most CGI movies. The combat system is the real star of the show here, managing to do the impossible by blending the old-school turn-based menu management with modern hack-and-slash action without it feeling like a chaotic mess. You can't just mash the attack button and expect to win because the enemies will absolutely rinse you. You have to actually build up your ATB gauge to use items or spells, forcing you to be tactical while dodging lasers and giant robots. Switching between characters feels fluid and necessary, with Tifa being a rapid-fire brawler who can stagger enemies in seconds, while Barret acts as a tank who can shoot pesky flying enemies out of the sky. The boss fights are spectacles that feel like MMO raids, with multiple phases and cinematic interruptions that make you feel like you are fighting for your life, even if the camera sometimes gets stuck behind a wall and blinds you at the worst possible moment. The story takes some massive liberties with the source material, introducing these Dementor-looking ghosts called the Whispers that physically intervene whenever the plot tries to deviate from the original game, which is a meta-commentary on fan expectations that is either genius or incredibly stupid depending on who you ask. It turns the narrative from a straight remake into a weird sequel-reboot hybrid that keeps you guessing, and the character writing is surprisingly strong, fleshing out side characters like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge, who were basically throwaway NPCs in the original. Cloud's development from an edgy, too-cool-for-school jerk to a guy who actually cares about his friends is handled well, and the voice acting sells the emotional beats perfectly. It is a flawed, bloated, but undeniably fun experience that proves you can teach an old dog new tricks, provided you have a billion-dollar budget and a killer soundtrack that slaps harder than it has any right to.
What's going on?
Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 doubles down on being grounded, historical, and straight-up hostile if you show up expecting a power fantasy. You play Henry again, and the story continues right where the first game left off. Nobody magically forgets who you are. The world stays medieval Bohemia, which means it's filthy, unfair, and completely uninterested in making you feel important. Henry isn't a chosen hero or some legendary warrior. He's a guy shaped by trauma, loyalty, and a long list of bad calls, trying to survive in a world that doesn't give a shit about him. The writing leans harder into politics, class tension, and how ugly medieval life actually was. Lords exploit people, wars are chaotic, justice depends on who you know. It all feels unpleasant on purpose. Gameplay is where the biggest improvement lands. Sword fighting feels like learning timing, spacing, and stamina instead of fighting the controller. Swing like a maniac and you die. Panic and you die. Try to fight 3 people at once and you die immediately. When you win, it feels earned because the game never tries to make it look cool. Progress comes from what you actually do. You want to read better? You read. You want to fight better? You train and get your ass kicked until you improve. The game never hands you growth for free. Even basic things like talking to nobles, sneaking around, or surviving in the wilderness require prep. Armor matters, hygiene matters, reputation matters. People react to how you look and behave, and that small detail changes how the whole world treats you. The world feels genuinely lived in. Towns are packed, dirty, and loud. NPCs work, sleep, argue, and gossip whether you're there or not. You overhear conversations that have nothing to do with you. Roads feel dangerous. Forests feel empty and threatening instead of being pretty background noise. Walking from one town to another feels like an actual journey instead of filler. The pacing stays slow and demands patience. You spend a lot of time talking, investigating, and setting things up before anything big happens. When those moments hit, they hit because the game took its time earning them. Characters avoid flashy archetypes. They feel human, selfish, and limited by their situation. Alliances feel unstable. Trust never feels permanent. It still has problems. The game stays unforgiving. Systems can overwhelm new players. Saving stays limited and annoying. Bugs are better than the first game, but they haven't vanished. If you hated the first game's obsession with realism, this one won't change your mind. As a story-driven RPG, though, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is special. It treats history seriously, respects your intelligence, and refuses to soften its world for comfort. It's slow, harsh, and deeply immersive. If you want a medieval story that feels human, dirty, and earned instead of heroic and clean, this game belongs on the list. Quantum Break is Remedy Entertainment basically looking at the medium of video games and deciding that it wasn't complicated enough, so they tried to forcefully weld a full-blown live-action TV show onto a third-person shooter, resulting in a project that is undeniably ambitious but also completely baffling in its execution. You are playing as Jack Joyce, who is just Sean Ashmore in a leather jacket, and after a science experiment goes wrong in a university lab that clearly failed every OSHA inspection in history, you get the ability to manipulate time while the rest of the world starts glitching out. The game operates on this weird rhythm where you play through a chapter of high-octane action, blowing things up and freezing people in time bubbles, and then the game literally grabs the controller out of your hands and forces you to sit down and watch a 20-minute episode of a live-action drama. The combat itself is actually some of the most satisfying shooter gameplay Remedy has ever cooked up, completely eclipsing the stiffness of Alan Wake because they finally let you play as a superhero rather than a scared writer with a flashlight. You aren't just taking cover behind waist-high concrete barriers like every other generic shooter from that era. You are actively encouraged to play aggressively by zipping across the room in a blur and flanking enemies before they even realize you moved. The time powers feel incredibly punchy, specifically the ability to cast a time bubble around an enemy and then empty an entire magazine of assault rifle ammo into it, stacking the bullets in the air so that when the bubble collapses, the guy just instantly vaporizes from the concentrated impact. The particle effects during these fights are absolutely insane, with the world fracturing into these sharp, geometric glass shards and ripples that make it look like your graphics card is having a meltdown, but it fits the narrative theme of time breaking down so perfectly that you don't even mind the visual noise. The story is a confusing knot of time travel paradoxes and corporate conspiracies, but it manages to hold itself together better than most sci-fi stories because it commits hard to the rule that you cannot change the past, only ensure that it happens the way it was always supposed to. It is a game that swings for the fences and misses the ball on a few huge design choices, specifically the massive file size and the streaming issues with the show, but you have to respect the hustle for trying something that nobody else was crazy enough to attempt. It stands as a unique, flawed experiment that is definitely worth playing once just to experience the sheer spectacle of a time-fractured world. Spec Ops: The Line masquerades as a generic bargain bin Call of Duty clone that you would find at a Walmart discount bin, but it is actually a psychological horror game disguised as a military shooter that actively hates you for playing it. You play as Captain Walker, a generic soldier man with a voice that sounds like he gargles gravel, sent to a version of Dubai that has been completely swallowed by sandstorms to check on a missing colonel named Conrad, but the game slowly twists that knife until you realize that you aren't the hero and you are actually making everything significantly worse just by being there. It is a deconstruction of the entire genre that forces you to look at the digital violence you usually consume without thinking and confronts you with the reality of what you are doing. The gameplay itself is aggressively mediocre, which is usually a criticism, but here it almost feels like an intentional design choice to lull you into a false sense of security before the narrative pulls the rug out. You are doing the standard cover shooter routine of running from waist-high wall to waist-high wall, popping up to shoot guys in the head with weapons that feel functional but uninspired. The controls feel a bit clunky and the movement has a heaviness to it that makes it feel like Walker is trudging through mud, or in this case, sand, which is the one unique mechanic where you can shoot out glass panes to bury enemies in an avalanche of silica. If you were judging this solely on the mechanics, it would be a forgettable 6 out of 10 experience that nobody would remember a week later, but the gunplay is just the delivery system for the trauma. However, the narrative is where this game grabs you by the throat because it is essentially a retelling of Heart of Darkness or Apocalypse Now set in a modern war zone where everything goes wrong. As you push deeper into the city, the situation deteriorates from a rescue mission into a chaotic free-for-all where you are fighting American soldiers, civilians, and your own sanity. The visual design of a buried Dubai is hauntingly beautiful, contrasting the opulence and gold-plated lobbies and luxury hotels with the gritty reality of corpses and sand dunes piling up in the hallways. It is a game that leaves you feeling dirty and hollow by the time the credits roll, successfully stripping away the glamour of the military shooter to show the ugly, traumatic reality underneath.
Man, I'm through with this shit.
Fuck you! At least I'm doing my job!
The Wolf Among Us. This game takes the concept of childhood fairy tales and drags them through the gutter of 1980s New York City in a way that feels surprisingly grounded and depressing. You have this hidden community called Fabletown, where characters like Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, and the Woodsman are living in these cramped, run-down apartments, trying to blend in with regular humans, or Mundies, and it is just a miserable existence for most of them. The lore explains that they were chased out of their homelands by a mysterious tyrant, so now they are refugees forced to buy expensive magic called glamour to look human, and if they can't afford it, they get shipped off to the farm in upstate New York, which sounds like a nice retirement home, but is treated like a prison sentence that nobody wants. It creates this immediate class divide where the rich fables live in luxury while the others are selling their furniture just to look normal enough to walk down the street to buy cigarettes. You are stepping into the shoes of Big B Wolf, the actual big bad wolf, who is now the sheriff of this dysfunction, and the writing does a great job of making you feel the weight of his past on your shoulders constantly. Everyone in town is terrified of you because you used to eat their grandmothers or blow their houses down, so even when you are trying to help, they look at you like you are a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. It is a really interesting dynamic where you are the law, but you are also the monster, and the story leans heavily into that internal conflict without being too preachy about it. You are investigating a murder right from the start, and it is not some clean CSI-style procedure, but a messy, violent spiral into the corruption of Fabletown where you have to interrogate people who already hate your guts. The narrative itself plays out like a classic noir film where it is always raining, everyone is smoking, and nobody is telling the truth, but it swaps the usual mobsters for trolls and woodsmen. It works because it takes these characters you know and twists them into these tragic, broken versions of themselves, like one of the 3 little pigs crashing on your couch and mooching off you because he has nowhere else to go. The story doesn't shy away from the brutality of this world, showing you exactly how desperate these creatures are to survive in a world that doesn't care about them, and it manages to keep you hooked on the investigation because every clue feels like it is peeling back another layer of filth.
Max Payne 3 is easily one of the best action games ever made, and it is crazy that Rockstar released this so long ago because it still plays better than almost anything coming out today. You play as Max, who is totally washed up and living a miserable life back in New Jersey, until an old friend convinces him to take a private security job down in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Max thinks he is just going to be a bodyguard for rich people and drink his sorrows away, but everything goes wrong immediately when the wife of his boss gets kidnapped by a powerful street gang. The story takes you on a wild ride through nightclubs and football stadiums and rundown favelas and even a police station as Max tries to fix his mistakes. You really feel his desperation because halfway through the game, he gets so fed up that he shaves his head completely bald and decides to go to war with everyone in the city. The gameplay is built around the famous bullet time mechanic, which lets you slow down time whenever you want so you can aim perfectly at bad guys while diving through the air. It is not just a gimmick because the game is actually pretty hard, and you need to use that slow motion to survive when you are surrounded by 10 enemies at once. Max feels heavy and realistic when you move him around, and you can feel the weight of his body when he slams into a wall or lands on the ground after a shoot dodge. There's also a really cool feature called Last Man Standing, where if you take too much damage and are about to die, you get one last chance to shoot the guy who shot you in slow motion to regain some health and stay alive. One of the coolest things about this game is how it handles weapons, because Max does not have magic pockets where he can hide 10 guns. If you were carrying a big assault rifle and you decide to pull out your dual pistols, Max will actually drop the rifle on the ground or hold it in his offhand, which makes the inventory feel super grounded and real. The attention to detail is insane because you can see the sweat soaking through Max's shirt as the level goes on, and you can see individual bullet holes in his jacket. The graphics use this glitchy visual style that flashes words on the screen to show how messed up Max's head is from all the drinking and painkillers he takes. You also have to talk about the soundtrack because it creates this incredible atmosphere that makes you feel like you are the hero in a sad but awesome action movie. The game is totally linear, so you never get lost, and the pacing is perfect because it keeps throwing you into new situations like shooting from a helicopter or sliding down a roof.
It is a masterpiece of third-person shooting, and if you missed it back in the day, you absolutely need to experience it now. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is kind of insane when you really think about it, because it's this huge open-world game that still feels like a really well-crafted story, which is not easy to pull off. You play as Venom Snake, who wakes up from a 9-year coma after his old base, Mother Base, gets destroyed in an attack. The story kicks in slow at first, but it's layered, with this mix of revenge, betrayal, and just all the shady stuff that goes on in private armies and secret organizations. It's interesting because the story isn't just in cutscenes. Sometimes you hear it through cassette tapes, sometimes from your soldiers at the base, and sometimes it's just in the environment, like a ruined village or an abandoned outpost that tells you something without words. The gameplay is huge. The world itself is massive, and the game doesn't force you down one path, which makes every mission feel different depending on how you approach it. You can crawl through sand, climb mountains, take helicopters to drop into enemy areas, or just roll in with guns and vehicles. There's a lot of attention to detail in how the world reacts to. If it rains, mud slows you down. Sandstorms mess with visibility, and guards talk to each other in a way that makes it feel alive. You're constantly thinking about your plan, but you also have freedom, which is pretty rare for a game of this scale. Then there's the whole Mother Base thing. You build it, recruit soldiers, send them on missions, and customize weapons and gear. It's not just some side thing, they actually interact with each other, and it changes the dynamic of the game. You start to care about your soldiers because they feel like real people, and there's a subtle story woven in their little interactions. You also get to develop cool gadgets, things like decoys, mine launchers, or rideable vehicles. And you can modify weapons to fit your playstyle, which is way more satisfying than just picking up a gun and shooting. What's really striking about Phantom Pain is how it balances big action moments with quiet ones. There are missions where you're literally alone in the desert at night, thinking about what you're doing and the people you've lost, and then other times it's pure chaos with explosions and helicopters flying around. The game also has a weird, unique history behind it. It was made after Hideo Kojima split from Konami, and you can kind of feel that tension in the way the story touches on betrayal, loyalty, and obsession. Some parts of the story even feel like commentary on the gaming industry itself, which is wild if you notice it. The soundtrack, sound design, and visuals are nuts. Footsteps in sand, enemy chatter, the wind blowing through mountains, it all pulls you in without being over the top. There's a day-night cycle and weather system that actually matters, like guards behave differently, and you can use that to your advantage, or just let it mess with your plans. And the sheer scale of the world, combined with all the little details, makes it feel like you're living in this place, not just playing a level. By the end, Phantom Pain sticks with you, because it's not just a game you finish and forget. There's a sense of melancholy, of what war does to people, and the story doesn't wrap things up neatly. You remember moments, little choices, and even failures. It's one of those games that rewards patience and attention, and it's easy to get lost in it for hours. It's kind of exhausting at times, but in the best way, because the world actually feels alive and dangerous and full of stuff to do.
Analysis complete.
Uncharted 4 acts like the final exam for every action-adventure game that came before it, and it passes with a score that makes everyone else look illiterate. You are jumping into the shoes of Nathan Drake one last time, but instead of immediately throwing you into a war zone, the game takes its sweet time showing you a version of a character that is washed up and trying to live a normal domestic life. It is a bold choice to make you sit through the mundane reality of his retirement because it perfectly sets up why he would eventually lie to his wife and drag his ass back into danger the second his brother shows up with a sob story. The narrative weight here is heavy, dealing with obsession and the fact that chasing adrenaline usually leaves your personal life in shambles, and it handles these themes with a maturity that you almost never see in a genre usually reserved for mindless explosions. The visual presentation is just stupidly good, and you don't even need to look for the small details to realize that this is one of the best looking things ever put on a screen. Every environment you move through, from the muddy jungles to the crumbling ruins, feels handcrafted and dense, creating an atmosphere that is so immersive it is actually hard to look away. The transition from cutscene to gameplay is so seamless that half the time you don't even realize you are back in control until you are getting shot at, which keeps the pacing moving at a speed that never really drags despite the game being fairly long for a linear story. It is the kind of polish that ruins other games for you, because you start noticing how janky everything else is by comparison. Gameplay-wise, it takes the standard cover shooter mechanics and injects them with a dose of speed and verticality that completely changes the rhythm of the fights. The grappling hook is the MVP here, allowing you to launch yourself across arenas and drop down on enemies, which turned what used to be a static shooting gallery into a high-speed playground of violence. You have the option to approach encounters with stealth, thinning out the herd quietly before things inevitably go loud, and the game feels designed to let you improvise when your plan falls apart. The climbing sections are still just holding a direction and watching an animation play out, but the sense of scale and the fluidity of the movement make it feel satisfying rather than tedious. The writing is the glue that holds the whole package together, delivering dialogue that sounds like actual human beings talking to each other rather than script-reading robots. The banter between Nate and his brother Sam feels natural and lived in, carrying a history that explains their reckless behavior without needing a ton of exposition dumps. It wraps up a decade-long franchise with an ending that feels earned and respectful to the characters, avoiding the trap of trying to do too much just for shock value. It is a masterpiece of pacing and presentation that stands as the definitive example of how to end a series without embarrassing yourself. Licensed superhero games usually fall into two categories. Either they're absolute hot garbage cash grabs, or they're decent for 5 hours and then you forget they exist. This one somehow dodged both and actually stuck the landing. What really makes it work is Peter Parker himself. This is not edgy, angry Spider-Man, and it's not Quit Machine cartoon Spider-Man either. He's older, broke, tired, juggling too much shit and constantly trying to do the right thing while everything keeps collapsing anyway. He feels overwhelmed in a very real way. Rent, work, relationships, responsibility, all of it piling up at once. The game actually treats that like the core of the story instead of background flavor. The tone is way more grounded than people expect. Yeah, it's still comic book stuff, but the writing keeps things human. The emotional moments don't come out of nowhere, and they don't feel forced. The game takes its time setting things up, so when stuff goes wrong, it actually hits instead of feeling like another cutscene you forget 5 minutes later. Gameplay-wise, this is one of those rare cases where just moving around feels good enough to carry the entire experience. Swinging through the city never really gets old, and that's insane considering how long the game is. You're not fighting the controls or babysitting systems. You're just flowing through the world, reacting to stuff as it happens. Combat is flashy and fun without being deep in a sweaty way. You feel powerful but not invincible, which fits Spider-Man way better than turning him into some unstoppable god. The world itself feels busy and alive without being exhausting. There's always something happening, but the game doesn't scream at you to do everything. You can just exist in the city for a while, and it feels right. Side content varies in quality, some of it is great, some of it is pure filler, but it never completely derails the experience. You're never too far from something interesting happening. What really surprised people was how hard the story goes emotionally. This isn't just a superhero power fantasy, it leans into consequences. People get hurt, mistakes matter. Being Spider-Man comes with a cost, and the game doesn't shy away from showing that. It respects the character enough to let things get uncomfortable instead of wrapping everything in a feel-good bow. Now, yeah, it's not perfect. Open world repetition is still there, some side activities feel like busy work, certain story beats are predictable if you know Spider-Man at all, but none of that really drags the game down because the core experience is so solid.
Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt. The Witcher 3 is one of those rare games that just doesn't feel old at all. You look at it now, years after it came out, and it still hits in almost every way. The story's huge, full of crazy twists, and it's the kind of story that actually sticks with you. You play as Geralt, a monster hunter. And yeah, you're out hunting monsters, but it's way more than that. You're traveling across this massive world, meeting people with their own lives, helping some, ignoring others, and every choice feels like it actually matters. Some decisions can bite you later, some feel really rewarding, and that's the kind of writing that makes a game timeless. Even side quests feel special. You're not just killing 5 rats or running fetch quests, you might be helping a merchant with a problem that turns out to be darker than it first looks, or finding a lost kid who changes your story in a small but memorable way. The world is insane. You can ride your horse through forests, swampy lands, or snowy mountains, and each place feels different and alive. Cities feel real.
full of people arguing, merchants shouting, guards patrolling, and sometimes chaos happening just in the background. The attention to detail is wild. You can just wander for hours and stumble into something interesting, and it still feels like an adventure, not filler. The weather and day-night cycle make it feel alive too. A sunny day feels peaceful, a rainy night feels tense. And hunting monsters at night in the fog is genuinely scary even today. Combat is another reason it aged so well. It's not some simple point and shoot. You have to plan, prepare your gear, pick the right sword, use magic signs, drink potions, and even set traps. Every fight feels like a puzzle in its own way, especially the big monsters. You can't just button mash, you have to think. And because there's so much variety in enemies, it never gets boring. Every fight feels satisfying, tense, and exciting. Even the visuals, voice acting, and music still hold up. Forests look dense, rivers shine, villages feel lived in, and the music is so good, it really sets the mood for every scene. Geralt's world is messy, dangerous, but also beautiful. And it's that mix that makes the game still feel alive today. Basically, The Witcher 3 aged like fine wine because it got almost everything right. Story, world, characters, combat, and even the little details you notice when you're just wandering around. You can jump back into it now and it still feels massive, exciting, and completely alive. You can replay quests, wander into new areas, and discover stuff you missed the first time. That's why it's still one of the best games ever made, and why it holds up even today.
In one piece. I shall be waiting.
Because this is the game that basically proved video games can tell stories just as good as the best movies out there. The world has been totally destroyed by a brain infection that turns people into aggressive monsters, but it is not your typical zombie apocalypse because nature has taken over everything. You play as Joel, who is this grumpy smuggler that has seen some terrible stuff, and he gets stuck with a job to escort a teenage girl named Ellie across the entire country. The relationship between these two is the whole point of the game. The gameplay is really tense because you are not a superhero, and you definitely do not have enough bullets to kill everyone. You have to play smart and sneak around enemies using a mechanic called Listen Mode, where Joel focuses his hearing to see the outlines of enemies through walls. The infected are terrifying, especially the clickers who are blind but can hear the tiniest noise, so you have to move the control stick super gently to creep past them without getting your throat ripped out. When you do get into a fight, it feels messy and desperate, and you have to use bricks and bottles to distract guys or stun them so you can run up and hit them with a pipe or a bat. Scavenging is a huge part of the loop because you have to check every drawer and corner for supplies like alcohol and rags. You use these items to craft shivs to open locked doors or make medkits and Molotov cocktails right in the middle of a battle without pausing the game. The graphics are absolutely beautiful in a sad way, showing you crumbled skyscrapers covered in green vines and empty houses that look like the people just left yesterday. The game takes you through all 4 seasons, and every new area feels distinct, from flooded cities to snowy woods. It is a strictly linear journey that forces you to keep moving forward, and the mix of stealth action and quiet moments where you just walk and talk with Ellie creates an experience that stays with you for a long time. Wolfenstein: The New Order takes the classic idea of shooting bad guys and turns it into one of the most intense and heavy action experiences you can play. The premise is a terrifying alternate history where the Nazis actually won World War II using mysterious advanced technology, and now it is the 1960s and they run the entire world with giant robot dogs and super soldiers. You play as BJ Blazkowicz, a soldier who wakes up from a 14-year coma to find out the good guys lost, and you have to join a small resistance group to fight back against this massive global empire. It sounds like a standard action movie setup, but the game treats the story with so much seriousness and heart that you actually care about the people you are fighting with. The gameplay is defined by how incredibly powerful the guns feel. While most games let you aim down the sights of one rifle, this game lets you dual-wield almost everything, meaning you can run into a room holding a massive automatic shotgun in each hand and just shred through everything in your path. The developers added a really smart cover system where you can lean out from behind walls or peek over crates just by holding a button and tilting your stick, which makes the firefights feel tactical and fluid. You're constantly switching between sneaking around with a knife to quietly take out commanders so they don't call for backup, and going fully loud with heavy machine guns when things inevitably go wrong. Another thing that makes this game stand out is the health system, because it doesn't just regenerate automatically like in other modern shooters. You have to actively run around picking up health packs, armor pieces, and even dog food to stay alive, which encourages you to keep moving and exploring every corner of the level. You can even overcharge your health by picking up extra medical kits, giving you a temporary boost so you can sprint into a room full of enemies and tank the damage. The mix of old-school health mechanics with modern graphics and storytelling creates a rhythm that is totally addictive. You go from quiet, emotional moments at your base to fighting Nazis on the moon, and the variety keeps you glued to the controller until the final mission is over. Until Dawn is the ultimate game for anyone who loves horror movies but hates when the characters make terrible decisions, because this time you are the one in the director's chair, calling all the shots. The premise is straight out the classic slasher flick, where 8 teenagers get stuck in a creepy lodge on a snowy mountain, and things go wrong almost immediately as they get hunted down one by one. You swap between all 8 characters throughout the night, and the tension is unbelievable because every single one of them can die if you mess up. The game doesn't let you reload a save file to fix a mistake, so if you miss a jump or fail to hide fast enough, that character is gone forever, and the story just keeps moving forward without them. The gameplay is all about the butterfly effect system, which tracks every choice you make, from big moral decisions down to tiny things like whether you picked up a baseball bat or left it on the shelf. These choices ripple out and change the story in ways you won't even realize until hours later, meaning 2 people playing this game can have completely different endings. Most of the time, you are walking around exploring dark rooms with a flashlight looking for clues to figure out who the killer is, but the game throws intense chase sequences at you where you have to hit buttons quickly to dodge obstacles and climb walls. One of the most intense mechanics involves the motion sensor on your controller. When your character is hiding in a closet or under a bed while the killer is walking right past them, a blue icon pops up and you have to hold the controller completely still in real life. If your hand shakes even a little bit, the game detects the movement and your character gets caught, which often leads to a gruesome instant death. It forces you to hold your breath in real life and makes you feel the same panic the characters are feeling. The graphics are incredibly realistic, with facial animations that show every ounce of fear, making it feel like you're playing a high-budget movie. It's a linear experience that drives you constantly toward the morning, but the thrill comes from trying to outsmart the game and keep everyone alive until the rescue team arrives.